All right, I want to we're going to take a break because that's required. But when we come back, I want to talk about the treason of Jay Nixon. Because if you're not aware of it now, the other day he vetoed the Second Amendment Preservation Act. And we're going to get into why. And he also vetoed another bill that a lot of people didn't even know about, was sitting on his desk, which is Paycheck Protection. Now, Paycheck Protection was the intermediate step between right to work and what we currently have, which is rule by union. And I don't care if you're a union guy and you get offended when I say this, because here's the problem. When you get offended when I talk bad about unions, that's because you got an axe to grind and you're getting greased by them. And that ought to tell you everything that you need to know, that you are no longer objective. Because the simple truth is that you should have the right to go get a job and not join a union if you don't want to, especially when they use your money in a way that you don't approve. And Paycheck Protection was supposed to do that. It was supposed to say, just because you join a union and you have to pay dues and you have to be a member of the union to have the job, you have the right to say, I don't want my money going to the likes of Obama. And he vetoed that. And what bothers me about it is that the House and the Senate passed that because they said, well, we'll never get right to work approved. Well, guess what? You didn't get the interim measure approved either. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the problem with compromise in Washington and Jeff City and every other state. We'll be right back. That's interesting. We took a commercial break so that you guys could hear a promo for America's Voice. I could have just done whatever.
So they come up with the Second Amendment Preservation Act. Now, this is a law which...
Well, the reason... wait till you hear the reason why this traitor vetoed it. Go ahead.
This is a law which supports a portion of the Bill of Rights. So it is in support of a portion of the Bill of Rights which is attached to the Constitution.
Right.
In support of.
Right.
Okay, so you would think that was a good thing.
And declares independence for the state from the federal government, which he's the head of the state, so therefore you'd think that he would want to do that. But somebody's compromised this scumbag. Somebody has gotten to him ideologically, politically, financially, morally, ethically, I don't know. But he vetoes the Second Amendment Preservation Act on two grounds. The first is he says that the right of supremacy under the Supremacy Clause in the federal Constitution for the federal government supersedes state rights, which is tantamount to the slave saying, "You're right, I should be a slave. I deserve slavery," which is so self-defeating and self-demeaning that it tells you that there's something behind this governor's betrayal of his own citizens, the 6 million Missourians. The second issue he vetoed it under was a claim that it violated the right of free speech for someone who wants to, because there's a clause in there that says, no person shall divulge the personal information of another based on their firearms ownership. And here's the real rub on this one. This one is actually even worse than the Supremacy Clause, because that could just be stupidity. But this one is where I really get my elbows bent. You see, the real reason he did that is because he knows that he and the Department of Revenue and the Highway Patrol are guilty of that which was about to become a crime. And they don't want to pass a law that they can be prosecuted under immediately thereafter. And so there's no better example of tyranny in action than a man who refuses to pass a law that is the will of the people because he's afraid to be prosecuted by it himself. In other words, he vetoed the law to protect himself from falling underneath the mantle of the illegality of his action.
Who owns this guy? Who's backing him up in his campaign?
I keep going back to this stuff that, I've been saying that the NSA has been monitoring Americans and using that information to compromise people in key roles of power, for decades. And up until 2 months ago, everybody said I was wearing a tinfoil hat. And now the proof is out there, and they can't deny it anymore, that they're monitoring everything about you. And everybody's got a skeleton somehow, somewhere, of some kind, including Governor Nixon. And governors, judges, prosecutors. I mean, look, Binney and a bunch of other NSA whistleblowers have come out and said that they targeted specifically judicial people, judges, lawyers, and prosecutors, to get them to conform. Now, when you have that kind of information, you use it because you can manipulate those people to achieve your desired end. So when they get a guy in there who they want to prosecute, and it looks like they got enough power, or that this guy's got enough evidence to get himself off, and they got a bad case, they go to the prosecutor, and they go to the guy's lawyer, and they go to the judge, and they say, or any one of the three, or all of the three, and say, you're going to find this guy guilty, and we don't care how you accomplish that, but you're going to find him guilty. And if you don't, here's what we're going to talk about. This picture of you with somebody who ain't your wife, maybe the image of maybe this email we found about some dirty real estate deal you did and how you made money that you shouldn't have made, or you used your influence, or you accepted a bribe, or you got a cocaine straw up your nose, or you're sucking on a crack pipe like the mayor of Washington, D.C., who got reelected after that.
Hey, don't talk about my boy Marion Barry like that.
Or maybe, whatever it is, I don't know what it is. See, because by doing what they wanted him to do, he's preserved his reputation.
So we don't know who backs him up.
We don't know who backs him up financially, and we don't know what secret he's now kept under the rug, because he did what they told him to do. He vetoed the bills. And you see, it's not just him alone. This is the problem with government having that kind of information and knowledge. When people have knowledge, they will use it. It's like saying, if I could go back in time, would I buy IBM stock? Of course I would. Why? Because I know that it started at 13 cents and it's gone to $300 and it's split 50 times. And I know that I could take my 13 cents and turn it into 13,000 in a relatively short period of time. Why? Because I have the knowledge and I can't help but use it, because I know at some point I'm going to say to myself, hey, why not? You need the money. You got to survive, right? And in this case, they use it for nefarious ends. We know that it happens. We don't know who it happens to, because when they do what they're told, then the information doesn't come out. But you see, it's blackmail, and it's like the guy says, "Hey, you know what? If you don't give me $1,000, I'm going to give your wife these pictures of you in a pub with another woman." So the guy hands him $10,000 in a paper bag, and the guy says, "I want you to destroy the tape." And he says, "Okay." And 6 months later, he comes back. He says, "Well, I destroyed the tape, but not the only tape. So I need another $10,000."
So you think he was told to shut up and color, and they told him what to color?
Well, either that, or he's been offered a seat at the table of whatever phoenix rises from this ash of pseudo tyranny / liberty that we recognize today as the United States of America.
Do you think he's headed for D.C.?
Well, he wants to be.
God help us.
I mean, that's his goal. And our Attorney General, Koster, is such a piece of crap. He won't even file a charge against the governor because he's grooming himself for the governor position. See, everybody has got their own personal agenda. And that's the problem. That's why money in politics has got to stop. Parties in politics have to stop. And the idea of bribery and intimidation and coercion by massive information capture has to stop. You know what John Adams said? There is nothing which I dread so much as a division of the republic into two great parties.
Bingo.
Each arranged under its leader and concerting measures in opposition to each other. This, in my humble opinion, is to be dreaded as the greatest political evil under our Constitution. See, what he was referring to there was the Republicans and the Democrats basically following the party's line instead of your line. This isn't we, the Republican Party, or we, the Democratic Party. This is we, the people. It's supposed to be a government by, of, and for the people. Not by, of, and for the Republicans. Not by, of, and for the Democrats.
When's the last time we had by, of, and for? World War I?
1792, the day we signed the Declaration, the Constitution, because the day after that, they immediately started to try to rivet it apart. I mean, you want proof? In 1798, they had to institute the principles of nullification because they passed what? The Sedition Act. Now, you can't ask for something more unconstitutional than an act that says if you verbally or if you verbally berate the president, you could be thrown in prison for that. That's a violation of free speech.
Well, the Sedition Act, and then...
So my point is that the Constitution wasn't even 3 or 4 years old, and already they were subverting it.
Agendas.
You see, the best intentions of men put a document out that acted as the framework, but we forgot to keep an eye on it. I don't. That's why I say that.
And John Adams could see that all the way back then, and this is back to the level of thinking exercised by the founders.
Well, look, and I'm sure he wasn't, a perfect man either. That's the problem, because people, even with their intentions, the best of intentions, aren't flawless. And the whole idea of the Constitution is to bind men down with the chains of it so that they cannot allow their idiosyncrasies, their personal biases, their subjectivity to rule the day.
And the document is supposed to rule the country.
Because, according to John Adams, the jaws of power are always open to devour, and her arm is always stretched out, if possible, to destroy the freedom of thinking, speaking, and writing. In other words, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And that arm of power is always out there trying to ensnare you. So Missouri's leader of the House, Tim Jones, he's a speaker. He said he wants to override the veto. And I can't tell you how many times I've heard during the course of the last legislative session where they said, we have a veto-proof majority, veto-proof majority. And what's frightening about this is the headline here, and this is the kansascity.com, some newspaper up there, says, Missouri House Speaker Tim Jones wants to try to override Governor Jay Nixon's veto of the gun rights bill passed by the legislature. I got to tell you, if this House and Senate don't override this and the Paycheck Protection veto and then move on and get right to work in this state, they should all be tossed out on their ear without fanfare, and every one of them should be removed, and a new crop of Missourians who will go up there and do it for free. I've had enough with paying for everybody to do stuff, because the money is the corrupting factor, that and whatever dirt they got underneath their boots. And I'm tired of the lies, and I'm tired of the party role, and I'm tired of the party name and the party doctrine. You know, I don't believe in the party. I believe in the Constitution. And the Constitution doesn't specify some party as the leader of our political endeavor. I'm not voting for a party. I'm voting for an individual who I expect to do the accurate, right thing by me. And if they're unwilling to do that, then they haven't earned my trust. And if they haven't earned my trust, then I, like John Adams, say there is nothing which I dread so much as a division of the republic into two great parties, each arranged under its leader, and concerting measures in opposition to each other. This, in my humble apprehension, is to be dreaded as the greatest political evil under our Constitution, because he recognized that what would ultimately happen is that both parties would claim to be against something, but the shill here is that you toss one out and bring the other in, but ultimately their goals are the same. So the agenda always moves forward because they're compromised, because they're corrupt, and whatever form that corruption takes doesn't really matter. See, we do need a revolution in the United States of America. I want it to be a peaceful, civil one, but it has to be a determined effort. You know, Adams, he put it in the correct manner. Here's what he said, and I want you to think about this, and you can look this up if you want, but what's really important is that you understand the context of what he's saying. As to the history of the revolution, my ideas might be peculiar, perhaps singular. What do we mean by the revolution? The war? That was no part of the revolution. It was only an effect and consequence of it. The revolution was in the minds of the people, and this was effected before a single drop of blood was shed. See, the revolution doesn't happen until the minds of the people have already committed to it. And that's where America has fallen down. You're not committed to the revolution because you fear that you'll be left out and that you won't have the same position you have now. You won't have that job you have, or you won't have that seat at the table that you have, or you won't have that retirement sitting there waiting for you. Do you realize that there are literally tens of millions of Americans who don't want to see the federal government converted to a true constitutional government because they're worried about their pensions? They're retired. And they're worried about whether or not that paycheck is going to be there every month. And they're concerned about the fact that America may say, you know what, in line with this, we're going to cut spending to the bone and we're not going to pay these pensions. Because these people, in many cases, betrayed us in their daily operational function. So they're against it because it personally negatively affects them. By the same token, the businessman says, well, if they change all the rules and they say that government can't create and maintain and support monopolies, we lose our positioning here as number one. And since my bread is buttered by being the CEO or the VP or the senior manager, I'm against it because it's going to negatively impact me. And that brings to mind the story of the men who signed the Declaration of Independence and led the revolution itself, and then crafted and drafted the Constitution. You see, they knew that it wasn't in their best interest to do that. In fact, they paid a very heavy price. And one day I'll be happy to do a show for you on what the actual prices were, because there's some history out there to be documented. But the simple truth is this: they were willing to do what was necessary for the long-term benefit of the country, even though short-term it was against their best interest.
the majority.
Well,
There's a couple exceptions.
of course. But for the most part, they put aside their own personal benefit for the benefit of the better, larger, long-term overall picture for the United States as a republic. And that self-sacrifice is the one thing that is missing in the world today.